The arrow missed Verna Thorne's head by less than an inch, and she did not even flinch, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for escape. She stood at the edge of the forest clearing, her green skin catching the late afternoon sunlight, her small tusks visible as her lips parted slightly in what might have been fear or resignation. The human farmer who had shot at her lowered his bow slowly, confusion replacing the anger on his weathered face when she made no move to flee or fight back. "What in the blazes?" he muttered, taking a cautious step forward. Verna remained perfectly still, her dark eyes tracking his movement but her body language suggesting nothing beyond passive acceptance. She had learned long ago that silence was her greatest shield, that the less she revealed of herself, the safer she remained. Her clan had cast her out 3 months prior for the crime of showing mercy to a human child who had wandered too close to their territory. They had beaten her, stripped her of her weapons, and told her she was no longer welcome among true orcs. Since then, she had survived by stealing from farms at night, always careful, always silent, always alone. The farmer was perhaps 40 years old, with brown hair streaked with gray and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore simple homespun clothing, dirt under his fingernails from a day of working the land. His farm sat at the very edge of the frontier, where human settlements gave way to the wild territories where orcs and worse things roamed. He studied Verna with a mixture of wariness and something she could not quite identify. Pity, perhaps, or curiosity. "You understand me?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Verna stared at him, keeping her expression blank. She understood him perfectly. She had learned the human tongue years ago, taught by her mother who believed that knowing one's enemies was essential to survival. But she would not speak. Speaking meant revealing too much, meant making herself vulnerable in ways that could get her killed. She had pretended to be mute for the past 3 months, and it had served her well enough. The farmer scratched his jaw, clearly uncertain what to do with an orc woman who appeared to pose no threat. "You stealing my chickens?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. 2 of his hens had gone missing the previous week. Verna had taken them, wringing their necks quickly and eating them raw in the forest because she had no way to make fire without drawing attention. She did not nod or shake her head, simply continued to stare. "Can you even understand me, or are you just dumb as a post?" The farmer took another step closer, and Verna tensed despite herself. He noticed the movement and stopped. "Easy now. I am not going to hurt you. You look half-starved, girl. When did you last eat?" The question surprised her. She had expected violence or threats, not concern. Her stomach answered for her, growling loudly enough that the farmer's eyebrows rose. He looked her up and down, taking in her ragged clothing, the bruises that had faded to yellow-green on her arms, the way her ribs showed too prominently beneath her torn tunic. His expression softened in a way that made something uncomfortable twist in Verna's chest. "Right then. Come on." He gestured toward his small farmhouse, a sturdy structure of timber and stone with smoke rising from the chimney. When Verna did not move, he sighed. "Look, you can stand there all night if you want, but the wolves come out after dark, and they do not care if you are human or orc. I have got stew on the fire. You are welcome to some if you want it." He turned and walked toward his house without looking back, as though he trusted she would not attack him from behind. Verna stood frozen for a long moment, every instinct screaming that this was a trap, that humans could not be trusted, that kindness was always a prelude to cruelty. But her stomach growled again, and she found herself taking one step forward, then another. The farmer, whose name she did not know, held the door open and waited. Inside, The farmhouse was warm and smelled of wood smoke and cooking meat. It was a single large room with a sleeping area partitioned by a curtain, a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with simple pottery and tools. The farmer ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls and set them on the table, then gestured for Verna to sit. She approached warily, ready to bolt at any sign of danger, but he simply sat down and began eating as though having an orc in his home was the most natural thing in the world. Verna sat on the edge of the chair, her muscles coiled tight. The stew smelled incredible, rich with vegetables and chunks of meat. She picked up the spoon with fingers that trembled slightly and took a small sip. The flavor exploded across her tongue, warm and savory, and unlike anything she had eaten in months. She took another spoonful, then another, forcing herself to eat slowly even though every fiber of her being wanted to devour the entire bowl in seconds. "My name is Thomas Vance," the farmer said between bites. "I've been working this land for about 15 years now, ever since I left the border guard. It is not much, but it is honest work." He paused, watching her. "You got a name?" Verna did not respond, focusing intently on her stew. Thomas nodded as though he had expected as much. "Cannot speak or will not speak. Well, I suppose it does not matter much. You need a place to stay tonight. The barn has clean straw and it is warmer than sleeping in the forest." The offer stunned her so thoroughly that she nearly dropped her spoon. She searched his face for signs of deception, for the cruel joke that surely lurked beneath this apparent kindness, but found nothing. Thomas just looked tired and perhaps a bit lonely, a man who had offered hospitality to a stranger because it was the right thing to do. Verna finished her stew and set the bowl down carefully, then nodded once. "Barn it is, then." Thomas collected their bowls and set them in a wooden bucket for washing. "There is a well out back if you want to wash up. I will get you a blanket." He moved around the house with easy efficiency, gathering a thick wool blanket and leading her outside to the barn. It was a small structure housing a cow, 2 goats, and several chickens that clucked nervously at Verna's presence. Thomas pointed to a corner where the straw was piled high and clean. "Help yourself. I will see you in the morning." He left her there, and Verna stood in the dim barn for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened. No human had ever shown her kindness before. Even as a child, when her mother had taken her to the borderlands to learn about the enemy, the humans they encountered had only ever responded with fear or hatred. This man, Thomas Vance, had fed her and given her shelter despite having every reason to drive her away or kill her. She did not know what to make of it. Sleep came slowly that night, interrupted by the unfamiliar sounds of the farm animals and the constant awareness that she was more vulnerable here than in the forest. But the blanket was warm and her stomach was full, and when dawn broke through the gaps in the barn walls, she woke feeling more rested than she had in months. Thomas appeared in the barn doorway carrying a bucket of feed for the chickens. "Morning," he said simply, scattering grain on the ground. The hens rushed forward, pecking eagerly. "There is water in the trough if you are thirsty. I am going to work the north field today. You are welcome to stay or go as you please." He said it casually, as though he truly did not care which she chose, then walked out, whistling a tune that echoed across the morning air. Verna emerged from the barn slowly, squinting in the bright sunlight. She should leave. Every bit of sense she possessed told her to disappear back into the forest before this human decided he wanted something from her, before his kindness turned into something darker. But her feet did not move toward the tree line. Instead, she found herself watching Thomas as he hitched his cow to a wooden plow and began working the field, turning over dark earth in neat rows. She spent the morning exploring the edges of the farm, always keeping Thomas in sight. He worked steadily, his movements practiced and efficient, pausing occasionally to wipe sweat from his brow or adjust the plow's angle. Around midday, he returned to the house and emerged with 2 cups and a pitcher of what looked like water. He poured 1 cup and set it on the fence post nearest to where Verna stood half hidden behind the barn, then walked back to the field with his own drink. The gesture was so simple, so unassuming, that it made Verna's throat tight. She approached the cup carefully, checking for poison or tricks, but it was just water, cool and clean. She drank it all, then set the cup back on the post. When Thomas came back at dusk, he collected the cup without comment and headed inside. Minutes later, he emerged and called out toward the barn, "Stew again tonight if you want some." This became their pattern. Thomas worked his farm, offered food and water, made no demands and asked no questions beyond simple observations about the weather or the work that needed doing. Verna stayed, telling herself each morning that she would leave that day, but somehow never quite managing it. She slept in the barn, ate the meals Thomas provided, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to relax. After 5 days, something shifted. Thomas was repairing a section of fence when one of the posts snapped completely, the old wood finally giving way. He swore under his breath and examined the damage, then looked toward the forest where fresh timber could be cut. Verna, who had been sitting in her usual spot near the barn, stood and walked over. She studied the broken fence, then pointed toward a fallen tree she had noticed at the edge of the property. It was already dead and dry, perfect for cutting. Thomas followed her gesture and his face brightened. "Well now, that would save me some time. Good eye." He fetched an axe and headed toward the fallen tree. Verna followed, watching as he began chopping. The work was hard, his arms straining with each swing. Without thinking, she reached out and gestured for the axe. Thomas hesitated, clearly weighing the wisdom of handing a weapon to an orc, but something in her expression must have convinced him. He passed her the axe. Verna hefted it, feeling its weight and balance, then began cutting with smooth, powerful strokes. Her orc strength made the work easier, and within minutes she had cut several fence posts of perfect length. Thomas watched with obvious appreciation. "You are stronger than you look," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Thank you for the help." They worked together to install the new posts, Thomas holding them steady while Verna drove them into the ground with a heavy mallet. It was the first time she had worked alongside another person in months, and despite herself, she found the experience oddly satisfying. When they finished, Thomas stood back to admire their work. "Sturdier than it was before. We make a good team." The word "we" hung in the air between them, strange and fragile and laden with possibility. Verna felt something crack open inside her chest, some defensive wall she had built beginning to crumble. She looked at Thomas, really looked at him, and saw not an enemy but a man who had shown her nothing but decency. He met her gaze steadily, those storm-gray eyes calm and kind, and smiled. That night after dinner, Thomas pulled out a worn wooden flute and began to play. The melody was simple and sweet, a folk tune that spoke of home and harvest and the turning of seasons. Verna sat on the doorstep of the barn, listening, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time: peace. When Thomas finished, he looked over at her. "My mother taught me that song. She said music could soothe even the wildest heart." He paused. "I do not know what happened to you or why you are out here alone, but I want you to know that you are safe here, for as long as you want to stay." Verna's throat worked, a dozen responses crowding her tongue, but she swallowed them all down and simply nodded. Thomas nodded back, seemingly satisfied, and went inside for the night. Verna sat in the darkness for a long time, Thomas's words echoing in her mind. Safe. When had she ever been safe? The days turned into weeks. Spring deepened toward summer, and the farm came alive with green growth. Verna found herself helping more and more with the work, hauling water, mending fences, even tending the garden that Thomas kept behind the house. She learned his routines, the way he always rose with the sun and retired soon after dark, the way he talked to his animals with the same respect he showed her, the way he hummed while he worked. And slowly, inexorably, she began to trust him. Thomas, for his part, seemed content with their silent arrangement. He spoke to her often, telling stories about his time in the border guard, about the farm and the seasons, about his hopes for the harvest. He never pressed her to respond, never grew frustrated with her silence. He simply talked, filling the quiet with his steady, calming voice, and Verna listened. One evening, nearly a month after Verna had first arrived, Thomas asked her to come inside the house proper for dinner, instead of eating on the doorstep as she usually did. She hesitated, some old fear rising up, but his expression was so open and hopeful that she found herself agreeing. They sat across from each other at the small table, eating roasted chicken and fresh bread, and for the first time in her life, Verna felt what it might be like to belong somewhere. "I was thinking," Thomas said, soaking a piece of bread in gravy, "that we should plant some late-season vegetables in the south plot. Turnips and carrots, maybe some beets. They will grow well into autumn if we get them in now." He spoke as though assuming she would still be here come autumn, as though her presence was simply a fact of life now. "What do you think?" Verna wanted to answer. She wanted to tell him that she thought it was a good idea, that she had helped her mother grow vegetables when she was young, that she knew how to prepare the soil and space the seeds for optimal growth. The words pressed against her teeth, desperate to escape, but fear held them back. What if her voice changed everything? What if speaking broke this fragile peace they had built? She settled for nodding enthusiastically, and Thomas grinned. "Turnips it is, then. We will start tomorrow." They worked the south plot for 3 days, turning soil and pulling rocks, arguing silently about the spacing of the rows until Thomas laughingly conceded that Verna's method was probably better than his. The work was hard but satisfying, and by the time they finished planting, Verna's hands were blistered and her back ached, but she felt a sense of accomplishment that had been absent from her life for too long. That night, a storm rolled in from the east, bringing driving rain and howling wind. The barn shook with each gust, and rain began to leak through gaps in the roof, soaking Verna's straw bed. She huddled in the driest corner she could find, wrapped in her blanket, shivering despite herself. She heard Thomas's door open and looked up to see him standing in the rain, holding a lantern. "Come inside," he shouted over the wind. "The barn is not safe in this weather." Verna shook her head, shrinking back. She could not impose on him like that, could not invade his private space. But another gust of wind tore at the barn's roof, and several wooden shingles went flying into the darkness. Thomas waded through the mud and rain to the barn entrance. "I am not asking. Come on." His tone brooked no argument. Verna gathered her blanket and followed him through the downpour to the house. Inside, she stood dripping on his floor, acutely aware of how out of place she was. Thomas handed her a dry blanket and gestured toward the fireplace. "Warm yourself. I will make tea." They sat by the fire as the storm raged outside, sipping hot tea sweetened with honey. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the house creaked and groaned but held firm. Thomas stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose I should tell you why I left the border guard," he said quietly. "Why I came out here to the middle of nowhere to farm." Verna looked at him, curious despite herself. Thomas took a long breath. I was part of a patrol that was ordered to clear out an orc settlement. They said it was a threat to the nearby villages, said the orcs had been raiding and killing. When we got there, we found mostly families, women and children, a few old warriors too injured or sick to fight. The captain ordered us to kill them all anyway. His voice went flat. I refused. Got court-martialed for it, stripped of my rank. They would have hanged me if I had not had friends willing to speak on my behalf. Instead, they discharged me and told me to disappear. He looked at Verna, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. I have killed people. Orcs and humans both, in battle and in defense of others. But I will not murder children, no matter whose children they are. That day, I realized that maybe the real monsters were not always the ones we were told to fear. He paused. I suppose that is why I did not turn you away. You came here desperate and hungry, and I saw a person in need, not a monster. Verna felt tears prick her eyes. She set down her tea with trembling hands and looked at this man who had defied his own people to protect hers, who had lost everything for his principles, who had shown her more kindness than her own clan ever had. The words rose in her throat, demanding to be spoken, and this time she did not push them back down. Thank you. Her voice was rough from disuse, barely more than a whisper, but it was her voice. Thomas's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock. Verna swallowed hard and continued, each word feeling like a stone rolling uphill. You are a good man, Thomas Vance, better than most, better than I thought humans could be. For a long moment, Thomas simply stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, genuine and warm and brighter than the fire. You can speak, he breathed. All this time, I thought. He shook his head, laughing quietly. You have a nice voice. I am glad to finally hear it. Verna felt her cheeks heat, an unfamiliar flush spreading across her green skin. I am sorry for deceiving you. I learned long ago that silence is safer than speech, that revealing too much of yourself gives others power over you. And now, Thomas asked gently, do you still believe that? Verna considered the question seriously. I do not know, but I know that you have earned my trust. You have shown me that not all humans are cruel, that kindness is not always a trap. I wanted you to know that I see what you have done for me, and I am grateful. Thomas reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was calloused from work, warm and solid, and Verna found herself squeezing back. You do not owe me gratitude, but I am glad you felt safe enough to speak. Will you tell me your name, Verna? Verna Thorne. Verna. He said it carefully, as though tasting the syllables. It suits you. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the small farmhouse, wrapped in firelight and the warmth of newfound understanding, Verna felt something shift fundamentally in her chest. She had been alone for so long, had believed herself unworthy of connection or care. But here was this human man, holding her hand and smiling at her as though she was something precious rather than something to be feared. They talked through the night, Verna's voice growing stronger and more confident with each passing hour. She told him about her clan, about the humans who had attacked them when she was young, about her mother who had taught her that understanding was better than hatred. She told him about the human child she had saved, how he had been lost and terrified, how she had led him back to the edge of his village and watched from the shadows to ensure he made it home safely. How her clan had discovered what she had done and beaten her, called her a traitor, cast her out to die. Thomas listened to it all, his expression growing darker as she described her exile. They were wrong, he said fiercely when she finished. Showing mercy is not weakness. Protecting a child is not betrayal. Your clan were fools to cast you out. Perhaps, Verna said softly, but their rejection led me here to you. I cannot entirely regret it. Thomas squeezed her hand again, and they fell into comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. Thomas gave Verna his bed, insisting despite her protests, and made himself a pallet by the fireplace. As Verna lay in the unfamiliar softness of a real mattress, listening to Thomas's breathing slow into sleep, she realized with startling clarity that she did not want to leave. Not now, not ever. This farm, this man, had become home in a way nothing else ever had. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. Thomas repaired the barn roof while Verna tended the garden, and life resumed its peaceful rhythm. But something had changed between them, some barrier dissolved. They talked now as they worked, Verna sharing stories about orc traditions and Thomas countering with tales from his days in the guard. They laughed together, argued playfully about the best way to train the goats to stay in their pen, shared meals and comfortable silences. As spring turned fully into summer, Verna became aware of other changes in herself. She noticed the way Thomas's arms flexed when he lifted heavy loads, the sound of his laughter, the gentle patience with which he treated every living thing in his care. She found herself watching him when she should have been working, memorizing the lines of his face, the way his hair fell across his forehead when he bent over his work. And sometimes, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart stutter in her chest. Neither of them spoke of it. The gulf between human and orc was vast, filled with centuries of distrust and violence. What they had built was fragile enough without adding the complications of attraction. But the awareness hung between them, thick and electric, making every accidental touch feel weighted with meaning. One hot afternoon in midsummer, Thomas suggested they cool off in the creek that ran through his property. Verna agreed eagerly, having eyed the clear water enviously for weeks. They walked to the creek together, and Verna watched as Thomas stripped off his shirt and waded in, sighing with pleasure at the cold water. She followed more cautiously, hyper-aware of his bare chest, the scars that marked his skin from old battles, the way water droplets caught the sunlight. They floated on their backs, staring up at the cloudless sky, and Verna felt utterly at peace. "I could stay here forever," she said without thinking, then froze, afraid she had revealed too much. Thomas turned his head to look at her, water lapping around them. "I would like that," he said simply, and Verna's heart soared. But peace, as Verna had learned, was always temporary. 2 weeks later, trouble arrived in the form of 3 men on horseback. They rode up to the farm in late afternoon, heavily armed and wearing the insignia of the border guard. Thomas went pale when he saw them, but composed himself quickly, walking out to meet them with Verna at his side. "Thomas Vance," the lead rider said, his voice cold. "Been a long time." "Captain Harris," Thomas replied evenly. "What brings you out here?" Harris dismounted, his eyes moving to Verna and narrowing with disgust. "Got reports of an orc in the area, stealing livestock, threatening farmers. Looks like we found our culprit." "Verna has not stolen anything or threatened anyone," Thomas said firmly. "She lives here, works the farm with me." "Whatever you heard, it is wrong. An orc living with a human," one of the other guards laughed harshly. "That is unnatural, Vance. Against the law, actually. Orcs are not permitted in human settlements without special dispensation. This is not a settlement. It is my private property, and I say who is welcome here." Harris stepped closer, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "You already threw away your career protecting orcs. Do not be a fool twice. Hand her over, and we will forget we saw her here. Otherwise, we will take her by force, and you will hang for harboring an enemy." Verna felt ice flood her veins. She had known this peace could not last, that eventually someone would come to tear it away. She looked at Thomas, intending to tell him it was all right, that he should let her go, that he had already risked too much for her sake. But before she could speak, Thomas stepped between her and the guards. "No," he said flatly. "You will not touch her. She has committed no crime. She has every right to be here. Step aside, Vance. That is an order. You have no authority to give me orders. I am not one of your soldiers anymore." Harris's face darkened with anger. "Fine. Have it your way." He drew his sword, and the other two guards followed suit. "You are both under arrest. Resist, and we will use whatever force is necessary." Everything happened very fast after that. Harris lunged forward, aiming for Verna. Thomas intercepted him, catching the sword on his forearm with a cry of pain. Blood spattered the ground. Verna roared, the sound tearing from her throat with primal fury, and threw herself at Harris, knocking him off his feet. The other two guards rushed forward, and suddenly they were fighting for their lives. Verna had been trained as a warrior before her exile. Her clan might have rejected her, but they had not taken away her skills. She fought with savage efficiency, disarming one guard and sending him sprawling into the dirt. Thomas, despite his injury, grappled with Harris, managing to wrestle the captain's sword away and toss it out of reach. The third guard charged at Verna with a spear, and she barely rolled aside in time, the point scoring a shallow cut along her ribs. She grabbed the spear shaft and yanked, pulling the guard off balance, then delivered a crushing blow to his jaw that dropped him instantly. Harris scrambled for a weapon, but Thomas tackled him again, and they rolled through the dirt in a tangle of limbs. Verna rushed over and hauled Harris up by his collar, holding him at arm's length. "Enough," she snarled, her voice commanding. "Leave now, or I will break every bone in your body." Harris stared at her with pure hatred, but something in her eyes must have convinced him she was serious. He spat blood and nodded curtly. "This is not over. We will be back with reinforcements. Then we will be gone," Thomas said, clutching his bleeding arm. "You can have the farm, Harris. It is just dirt and wood, but you cannot have her." Harris gathered his stunned and groaning men, and they rode off, casting dark looks over their shoulders. The moment they were out of sight, Verna turned to Thomas, her earlier fury transforming into frantic concern. "You are hurt. Let me see." Thomas's forearm was sliced open, blood flowing freely. Verna tore strips from her tunic and bound the wound tightly, working with practiced efficiency. "We need to stop the bleeding," she muttered. "Then we need to pack and leave. They will come back and they will bring more men. We have to run." "I know." Thomas looked at his farm, at the fields he had worked so hard to cultivate, at the small house that had been his refuge. Pain flickered across his face, but he nodded. "I know, I just need a moment." Verna understood loss. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I am sorry. This is my fault. If I had never come here, you could have kept your home." Thomas turned to her, his gray eyes fierce despite the pain. "Do not apologize. You did not do this. They did. And I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." He reached up with his good hand and cupped her cheek, his touch impossibly tender. "You are worth more than any farm." Verna felt tears spill over, hot and unexpected. No one had ever valued her above their own interests before. She leaned into his touch, memorizing the warmth of his palm, the calluses she knew so well. "Where will we go?" "North," Thomas said. "Deep into the wilderness where the border guard does not patrol. It will be hard living, but we will survive. Together. Together." The word wrapped around Verna's heart and squeezed. She nodded, swallowing her tears, and helped Thomas gather what they could carry. Food, blankets, weapons, basic tools. They packed quickly, efficiently, both of them acutely aware that time was their enemy now. By the time the sun began to set, they were ready. Thomas took one last look at his home, his expression grief-stricken but resolute. Then he shouldered his pack and nodded to Verna. Let us go." They walked into the forest as darkness fell, leaving behind the farm and the life they had built there. Verna led the way, her orc senses sharp in the wilderness, guiding them along game trails and through the densest parts of the forest where horses could not follow. Thomas kept pace despite his injury, his jaw set with determination. They walked through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the inevitable pursuit. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles. Thomas was pale and sweating, his arm still seeping blood through the makeshift bandage. Verna found a small cave hidden behind a waterfall and insisted they stop to rest. She built a fire deep enough in the cave that the smoke would be dispersed by the waterfall, then carefully unwrapped Thomas's arm. The wound was ugly, deep enough to scar but not life-threatening if it was kept clean. Verna boiled water from the stream and used it to wash the cut, then applied a poultice made from herbs she had gathered along the way. Thomas watched her work, his expression soft. "You are good at this," he observed. "My mother was a healer. She taught me the basics." Verna finished binding the wound with clean cloth torn from Thomas's spare shirt. "You need to rest. The fever will come soon, and you will need your strength to fight it. What about you? I will keep watch." Verna settled herself at the cave entrance, where she could see the forest but remain hidden from view. "Sleep, Thomas. I will keep us safe." Thomas wanted to argue, she could see it in his face, but exhaustion won out. He lay down on the blankets they had spread near the fire and was asleep within minutes. Verna watched over him as day broke fully, listened to his breathing, and prayed to God. She was not sure she believed in that he would be all right. The fever came that afternoon, just as she had predicted. Thomas tossed and turned, muttering incoherently, his skin burning to the touch. Verna bathed his forehead with cool water, forced him to drink when he was lucid enough, changed his bandages when they became soaked with sweat and blood. She did not sleep, did not let herself rest even for a moment. She had already cost him so much. She would not let him die. For 2 days, the fever raged. Verna barely left his side, tending to him with a single-minded devotion that surprised her with its intensity. She had cared for wounded warriors in her clan, had nursed her own mother through illnesses, but this was different. Every labored breath Thomas took felt like a knife to her heart. The thought of losing him was unbearable. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Thomas opened his eyes, clear and focused for the first time since the fever began, and found Verna slumped beside him, her hand still gripping his. "Verna," he croaked, his voice rough. She jerked awake instantly, searching his face. Relief flooded through her when she saw he was lucid. "You are back," she breathed. "Thank the ancestors, you are back." "You look terrible," Thomas said, attempting a smile. "When did you last sleep?" "I am fine. You are the one who nearly died." Verna helped him sit up and pressed a cup of water to his lips. He drank deeply, then reached out and caught her hand. "Thank you," he said seriously, "for everything. For saving my life, for getting us out of there, for taking care of me. I do not think I properly understood before now just how strong you are." Verna shook her head. "You saved me first. You gave me a home when I had nothing, showed me kindness when all I had known was cruelty. We are even." "I do not want us to be even." Thomas's grip on her hand tightened. "I want—" He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "Verna, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I know we come from different worlds. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is impossible, but I do not care anymore. I love you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and brave and terrifying. Verna stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Thomas, You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know. Whatever happens, wherever we go from here, I need you to know that you mean everything to me." Verna felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were not tears of grief or pain. "You fool," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You absolute fool. Of course I love you. How could I not? You are the best person I have ever known. You make me want to be better, braver, kinder. You make me believe that maybe I am not broken after all." Thomas pulled her close, and she went willingly, burying her face against his shoulder. They held each other as the fire burned low, two souls who had found each other across an impossible divide and refused to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas cupped Verna's face in both hands and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, and finally, gently, her lips. The kiss was soft and sweet and tasted like hope. Verna kissed him back, pouring everything she could not say into the press of her mouth against his, the way her hands tangled in his hair, the small sound of contentment that escaped her throat. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "We should probably figure out what we are going to do now," Thomas said eventually, though he made no move to release her. Verna laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "We keep moving north. Find somewhere remote where no one will bother us. Build a new home." "Together," Thomas said firmly. "Together," Verna agreed. They rested another day in the cave, allowing Thomas to regain his strength. Then they gathered their belongings and continued their journey north, moving deeper into the true wilderness where few humans and even fewer orcs ventured. The land grew rougher, more mountainous, the forests thick with ancient trees and wild game. It was hard traveling, but Verna found she did not mind. With Thomas at her side, even hardship felt manageable. 3 weeks after fleeing the farm, they found what they were looking for. A small valley tucked between two mountains, accessible only through a narrow pass that could be easily defended. A clear stream ran through the center, and the soil was rich and dark. Game trails crisscrossed the forest, promising good hunting. It was isolated, beautiful, and perfect. "This is it," Thomas said, surveying the valley with satisfaction. "This is where we build our new home." They set to work immediately. Thomas's skills as a farmer and former soldier combined with Verna's orc strength and knowledge of wilderness survival made them a formidable team. They built a cabin from timber, small but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and shuttered windows. They cleared a plot for a garden and planted the seeds Thomas had brought from his old farm. They hunted and fished and gathered berries, preserving what they could for the coming winter. The work was exhausting and never-ending, but Verna had never been happier. She and Thomas fell into an easy partnership, each anticipating the other's needs, working in comfortable synchronicity. At night, they would sit by the fire in their new home, Thomas playing his flute while Verna mended clothes or sharpened tools, and everything felt right in a way that Verna had never experienced before. As summer deepened toward autumn, their relationship deepened as well. The kisses became more frequent, more heated. Thomas would pull Verna close while they worked, stealing moments of affection throughout the day. Verna found herself initiating contact just as often, drawn to his warmth and solidity, the sense of safety she felt in his arms. They had not yet taken things further, both aware that crossing that final threshold would bind them together irrevocably, but the tension built between them like a gathering storm. One evening in late summer, as they sat watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas turned to Verna with an expression of nervous determination. "There is something I want to ask you," he said, his voice oddly formal. Verna set down the pot she had been scrubbing and gave him her full attention. "What is it?" Thomas took a deep breath, then got down on one knee in front of her. Verna's breath caught. "I do not have a ring," he said, pulling a small carved wooden pendant from his pocket. I made this from birch wood, because you told me once that birch trees are sacred to your people. It is not much, but it is all I have to offer." He looked up at her, his gray eyes shining with emotion. "Verna Thorne, will you marry me? Will you be my wife? Build a life with me here in this valley, and let me love you for all my days." Verna could not speak. Her throat had closed completely, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was offering. Marriage between human and orc was not just uncommon, it was virtually unheard of. Both their peoples would consider it an abomination, but Thomas was looking at her with such hope, such love, that none of that mattered. "Yes," she managed to choke out. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." Thomas surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and clung to him. When he set her down, he carefully fastened the wooden pendant around her neck. It lay against her skin, warm and solid, a physical reminder of his promise. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I will love you until I draw my last breath." "And I love you," Verna replied, cupping his face in her hands. "You are my home, Thomas Vance, the only home I will ever need." They made love that night for the first time, slow and tender in front of the fireplace, learning the geography of each other's bodies with reverent attention. Thomas traced the scars that marked Verna's green skin, kissing each one as though he could heal old wounds with his affection. Verna explored the planes of his chest, the muscles of his back, marveling at the trust implicit in the way he opened himself to her. When they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, two pieces that had always been meant to fit this way. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath a blanket, watching the fire burn low. "We should probably have some kind of ceremony," Thomas said, his fingers tracing idle patterns on Verna's shoulder. "Make it official." "How do humans marry?" Verna asked curiously. "In my clan, couples would pledge themselves before the clan elders and then jump over a bonfire together. If they made it across without falling, the marriage was blessed." Thomas chuckled. "That sounds significantly more exciting than a human wedding. We usually just exchange vows in front of witnesses and a religious official. But since we do not have any of those things here, I suppose we will have to make up our own ceremony." They spent the next week planning their wedding, treating it with a seriousness that might have seemed absurd given their isolation, but felt entirely appropriate to them. Thomas carved a second pendant for himself, matching Verna's. Verna gathered wildflowers from the meadow and wove them into a crown. They wrote their own vows, practicing them aloud to each other and laughing when they stumbled over particularly earnest phrases. The day they chose for their wedding dawned clear and bright, the air crisp with the first hint of coming autumn. They dressed in the best clothes they had, which was not much but would suffice. Verna wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from deer hide, decorated with beadwork she had made from river stones. Thomas wore a clean shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. They walked to the center of the meadow, where a natural circle of stones seemed placed just for this purpose. Standing facing each other, with the mountains as witnesses and the sky as their ceiling, they joined hands. Thomas spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Verna Thorne, I vow to stand beside you through whatever comes. I vow to honor your strength, cherish your kindness, and love you without reservation or doubt. You have taught me that family is not defined by blood or species, but by choice and commitment. I choose you today and every day for as long as I live." Verna swallowed hard, her own voice thick with tears. "Thomas Vance, I vow to be your partner in all things. I vow to trust you with my heart, defend you with my strength, and build a future with you filled with hope rather than fear. You have shown me that I am worthy of love, that my past does not define my future. I choose you freely and completely for all my days." They exchanged their pendants, fastening them around each other's necks with shaking fingers. Then, because they wanted to honor both their traditions, Thomas produced 2 thick branches he had lashed together and set them alight. They stepped back to give the fire room to grow. Then, at an unspoken signal, ran forward hand in hand and jumped. They sailed over the flames together, landing on the other side in a tangle of limbs and laughter. Thomas pulled Verna up, and they stood there, grinning at each other like fools, officially married by their own declaration if no one else's. "I love you, wife," Thomas said, trying out the word. "I love you, husband," Verna replied, and the word felt like magic on her tongue. They celebrated their wedding with a feast of roasted venison, fresh bread, and berries preserved in honey, then danced in the meadow to music only they could hear. As the sun set and stars emerged overhead, they returned to their cabin and made love again, this time with the added weight of their vows binding them together. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Verna's life. She and Thomas settled into married life with ease, their partnership strengthening with each passing day. They finished preparing for winter, smoking meat and storing vegetables, gathering firewood and reinforcing the cabin against the coming snows. They worked side by side, and when the work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk about everything and nothing, or sometimes just exist together in comfortable silence. When the first snow fell in late autumn, blanketing the valley in white, they stood together on the cabin's small porch and watched it come down. "Beautiful," Thomas murmured, his arm around Verna's waist. "It is," Verna agreed. "But I am glad we have a warm home to return to." "Me too." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "I have been thinking. Next spring maybe we could expand the cabin, add another room, in case we eventually need more space." Verna understood what he was carefully not saying. "You want children? Only if you do." "I know it is complicated with us being different species. I do not even know if it is possible." "It is possible," Verna said quietly. "Rare, but possible. My mother told me stories of such children called half-bloods. They are usually stronger than humans but smaller than orcs, and they can pass as either depending on which traits they inherit more strongly." She paused. "I would like children, with you, not right away perhaps, but someday." Thomas smiled, bright and hopeful. "Someday," he agreed. "We have time." Winter set in earnest, and the valley transformed into a pristine world of snow and ice. They spent their days maintaining the cabin and animals, tending the fire, cooking meals together in their small kitchen. Thomas taught Verna to read and write in the human language, something she had never learned, and Verna taught Thomas some of the old orc songs her mother had sung. The isolation that might have driven some people mad felt like a blessing to them, a cocoon of safety where they could be themselves without fear or judgment. One particularly cold night, as they huddled together beneath every blanket they owned, Thomas said, "Do you ever miss your clan? Despite everything, do you ever wish you could go back?" Verna considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss my mother. She died when I was 16, and I would like to think she would have been happy for me, proud that I found someone who values me. But the clan? No. They taught me that love is conditional, that belonging must be earned through conformity. You have shown me the opposite. I do not miss a place where I was never truly welcome." "Do you think they would come after you, try to reclaim you or punish you?" "No. Once someone is exiled, they are considered dead. My clan will not waste resources on the dead." Verna snuggled closer to Thomas, seeking his warmth. "What about you? Do you regret giving up your old life?" "Never," Thomas said firmly. "That life was lonely and full of compromises I hated making." This life, here with you, is everything I ever wanted but did not know how to ask for." They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, the wind howling outside but unable to touch them in their sanctuary. Spring returned eventually, as it always does, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the earth. Verna and Thomas emerged from their cabin like bears from hibernation, blinking in the bright sunlight, eager to start planting and building again. They expanded the garden, adding more variety, and Thomas made good on his promise to add another room to the cabin. They spent weeks on the construction, Verna hauling timber and Thomas doing the fine carpentry work, and by the time summer arrived in full, their home was noticeably larger. One morning in midsummer, Verna woke feeling decidedly unwell. Her stomach churned, and the smell of breakfast cooking made her rush outside to vomit in the bushes. Thomas followed, concerned, and held her hair back as she retched. When the nausea finally passed, she sat back on her heels, suddenly understanding. "I think I am pregnant," she said, wonder and fear mingling in her voice. Thomas's eyes went wide. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely, but I am late, and I have never been ill like this before." She looked up at him. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Thomas pulled her into his arms, laughing. "Verna, I am terrified and elated and completely unprepared, but yes, I am happy." "Are you?" Verna thought about it, about the life growing inside her, about raising a child in this isolated valley with only Thomas for help and company. It would be difficult. The child might face challenges neither of them could fully anticipate. But looking into Thomas's shining eyes, feeling the solid warmth of his embrace, she found she was not afraid. "Yes," she said simply, "I am happy." The pregnancy was not easy. Verna suffered through weeks of morning sickness that sometimes lasted all day. Her body changed rapidly, her orc constitution speeding the process along faster than a human pregnancy would progress. Thomas was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly fretting about her health, insisting she rest while he took on all the heavy work. Verna tolerated this for about 2 weeks before putting her foot down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she informed him after he tried to stop her from lifting a water bucket. "I need to stay strong. Coddling me will not help." Thomas had the grace to look sheepish. "I know. I am sorry. I just worry." "Worry less, trust more," Verna said, softening her tone. "I will tell you if I need help, but I need to feel useful, Thomas. I need to contribute." They found a balance, Thomas handling the truly heavy work while Verna focused on tasks that kept her active without overexerting herself. She spent hours gathering herbs and preparing supplies for the birth, drawing on her mother's teachings. Thomas carved a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, then decorating it with images of animals and stars. As autumn approached and Verna's belly swelled with their child, they had a serious discussion about what would happen if something went wrong during the birth. They were far from any healer, any help. If complications arose, they would have to handle them alone. "If it comes down to a choice," Verna said, her hand resting on her stomach, "save the baby, promise me." "No." Thomas's voice was hard. "I will not promise that. I will not lose you, Verna." "Thomas, please, no. We will both survive this, you and the baby. I refuse to consider any other outcome." His jaw was set with stubborn determination, and Verna recognized the futility of arguing. She let the matter drop, but privately she made her own plans. She would not let Thomas sacrifice their child for her sake. The contractions started on a crisp morning in late autumn, nearly a year since they had fled Thomas's farm. Verna woke Thomas with a calm declaration that the baby was coming, then proceeded to walk him through the preparations with far more composure than he could muster. Thomas rushed around gathering supplies, boiling water, laying out the clean cloths and tools Verna had prepared, while she breathed through the increasingly intense contractions. The labor lasted 14 hours. Verna bore it with gritted teeth and an occasional growl of pain, refusing to scream despite Thomas's insistence that she should if it helped. Thomas stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement and love. When the baby finally emerged, slippery and squalling, Thomas caught her in gentle hands and held her up. "A girl," he breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Verna, we have a daughter." The baby was perfect. She had her mother's green skin, though lighter in shade, and her father's gray eyes. Tiny tusks, barely visible, protruded from her lower jaw. Her ears were pointed but smaller than a full orc's. She was, as Verna had predicted, a beautiful blend of both her parents. Thomas cleaned their daughter carefully and wrapped her in soft cloth, then placed her in Verna's arms. Verna looked down at the tiny face, the small hands already trying to reach for her, and felt her heart expand beyond what she thought possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." "What should we name her?" Thomas asked, settling beside them on the bed. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their daughter, Verna knew. "Tessa," she said. "It means to harvest in the old orc tongue. She is our harvest, the fruit of everything we have sown together." "Tessa Vance," Thomas said, trying it out. "It is perfect. She is perfect." He kissed Verna's forehead, then his daughter's. Thank you for this gift for our family." Verna leaned against him, exhausted but deeply content. "We made her together. She is our miracle." The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Tessa was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an appetite that kept Verna constantly feeding her. Thomas proved to be a natural father, changing swaddling without complaint, walking the floor with Tessa when she fussed, singing her the songs his own mother had sung to him. Watching him with their daughter, Verna fell in love with him all over again. As winter set in once more, they settled into their new reality as parents. The cabin that had seemed spacious with just the two of them now felt full of life in the best possible way. Tessa grew rapidly, her orc heritage making her stronger and more alert than a human infant would be at the same age. By 3 months, she was already trying to roll over. By 6 months, she was crawling with determined efficiency. One evening, as they sat by the fire with Tessa playing on a blanket between them, Thomas said, "I have been thinking. Tessa will need other children to play with eventually. She cannot grow up completely isolated." Verna had been thinking the same thing. "There is a settlement about 3 days' travel east of here. Mixed population, humans and orcs and even some elves. I heard about it from a trader who passed through years ago. It is supposed to be a place where the old prejudices hold less sway. Should we consider moving there? Maybe. Not now, while Tessa is so young, but in a few years. Yes, she should grow up knowing there is a wider world, that she is not the only one of her kind." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "We will go when she is older then, see if this settlement is as welcoming as the stories suggest. If it is, maybe we can build a life there. If not, we come back here." It was a solid plan, and having it in place eased some of Verna's worries about raising a half-blood child in isolation. For now, though, they were content in their valley. Tessa thrived, growing into a bright, curious toddler who kept them constantly on their toes. She inherited her mother's strength and her father's gentleness, along with a stubbornness that clearly came from both sides. When Tessa was 2 years old, Verna discovered she was pregnant again. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because Thomas had learned to walk the line between supportive and smothering. Their son was born in early spring, smaller than his sister had been but just as healthy. They named him Marcus, after Thomas's father. Marcus had more human features than Tessa, his skin only faintly green-tinged, his tusks so small they might go unnoticed unless someone looked closely. His eyes were deep brown like Verna's, and he had his father's quiet, contemplative nature even as an infant. Where Tessa was bold and adventurous, Marcus was cautious and thoughtful. Together they were perfect. With two small children, the cabin felt genuinely cramped, and Thomas began planning a larger home. But before they could start construction, visitors arrived in the valley. It was late summer, and Verna was hanging laundry while Thomas worked in the garden and the children played nearby. Tessa, now 3, was the first to notice the strangers, pointing and calling out. Verna's head snapped up, her body tensing automatically. 3 figures stood at the entrance to the valley, 2 orcs and a human woman. Thomas grabbed his bow, and Verna moved to stand between the strangers and her children. The visitors raised their hands in a gesture of peace and approached slowly. As they drew closer, Verna recognized the human woman. She was one of the traders who occasionally passed through this region, someone Verna had seen years ago but never spoken to. "We mean no harm," the woman called out. "We are from the settlement of Haven's Cross. We have been looking for you." "Why?" Verna demanded, not lowering her guard. "Because stories have been spreading," one of the orcs said, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes. "Stories about an orc woman and a human man who fled their peoples to be together, who built a life in the wilderness, about their half-blood children. We came to see if the stories were true and to offer you a place with us if you want it." Thomas stepped forward, still wary but curious. "What is Haven's Cross?" The human woman smiled. "A settlement founded on the principle that the old hatreds serve no one. We have humans, orcs, elves, even a few dwarves. Mixed families are common. Children like yours grow up accepted, valued. We heard about what happened at your farm, Thomas Vance, about how you defended Verna against the border guard. Word spread, and eventually it reached us. We have been searching for you for 2 years." Verna and Thomas exchanged glances. This was what they had hoped to find eventually, but having it arrive at their doorstep was unexpected. "Why do you care what happens to us?" Verna asked. "Because you represent hope," the older orc said. "Proof that humans and orcs can build something together beyond war and mistrust. Your existence, your children matter, and because no one should have to live in isolation when there is a community that would welcome them." They talked for hours, the visitors explaining more about Haven's Cross, about its founders and its laws, about the challenges and successes of running a truly integrated settlement. Verna and Thomas asked every question they could think of, weighing their options carefully. The visitors were patient, answering everything honestly, even acknowledging the difficulties that remained by the time the sun began to set. Verna and Thomas had made their decision. They would visit Haven's Cross, see it for themselves. If it lived up to its promise, they would join the settlement. If not, they would return to their valley and continue as they had been. "Thank you for coming all this way to find us," Thomas said as the visitors prepared to leave, declining the offer to stay the night. "We will follow you to Haven's Cross within the week." The journey to Haven's Cross took 5 days with 2 small children, but the visitors had been truthful about the route being safe and well-traveled. When they finally crested the last hill and saw the settlement spread below them, Verna caught her breath. It was larger than she had expected, perhaps 200 buildings ranging from small cottages to larger communal structures. Fields surrounded the settlement, green with growing crops. And everywhere she looked, she saw mixed groups of humans, orcs and other races working together, talking together, living together. They were greeted at the settlement's entrance by a welcoming committee that included an elderly human man and an orc woman with ceremonial markings. "Welcome to Haven's Cross," the man said warmly. "I am Elder Nathan, and this is Elder Sarilla. We have been expecting you." The next few hours were a whirlwind of introductions and tours. They were shown potential homes, introduced to families with half-blood children similar to Tessa and Marcus, taken to see the school where all children learn together regardless of species. Everywhere they went, people greeted them with genuine friendliness, and Verna felt the last of her defensive walls begin to crumble. That evening, at a community feast held in their honor, Elder Sarilla stood and raised her cup. "We welcome Thomas Vance, Verna Thorne, and their children to Haven's Cross. May their courage in building a life together inspire us all to continue breaking down the barriers that divide us." The crowd cheered, and Verna found herself surrounded by well-wishers, people eager to hear their story, to offer friendship and support. Tessa, shy at first, was soon playing with a group of children that included humans, orcs, and half-bloods like herself. Marcus slept peacefully in Thomas's arms, content despite the noise and crowd. Verna looked around at this impossible community, at the life they could build here, and then at Thomas. He met her eyes and smiled, understanding passing between them without words. This was right. This was where they were meant to be. "So," Thomas said quietly, "shall we stay?" "Yes," Verna replied, her heart full to bursting. "Let us stay." They built their new home on the eastern edge of Haven's Cross, a larger structure than their cabin had been, with room for their growing family and the life they were creating. Thomas opened a small farm, growing vegetables to trade within the settlement, while Verna used her healing knowledge to assist the settlement's primary healer. Their children grew up surrounded by friends of all species, learning that love and family came in many forms. 3 years after arriving at Haven's Cross, Verna gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. They were followed 2 years later by another daughter. Each of their 5 children was unique, inheriting different mixtures of human and orc traits, but all were healthy and loved beyond measure. On their 10th anniversary, Thomas and Verna stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard with a mixed group of friends. Tessa, now 12, was teaching the younger children to climb trees. Marcus, 10, was reading to a small group in the shade. The younger 3 were running in circles, shrieking with laughter. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked, taking Verna's hand. "Leaving your clan, living on the run, all the hardships we faced?" Verna thought about the girl she had been, silent and scared and alone, pretending she could not speak because she was afraid of what might happen if she revealed too much. She thought about Thomas's gentleness, the way he had drawn her out with patience and kindness, showing her that she was worthy of love and belonging. She thought about everything they had built together, the family they had created, the life that exceeded anything she could have imagined. "Never," she said, squeezing his hand. "Every moment of struggle led us here, to this life, to these children. I would do it all again without hesitation." Thomas pulled her close and kissed her, deep and loving and full of promise. "So would I. You gave me everything, Verna. Purpose, family, happiness. You are my greatest adventure." "And you are my home," Verna replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "You always have been. From the moment you offered me that first bowl of stew, you saw me when everyone else only saw a monster. You loved me when I did not know how to love myself. Everything good in my life comes from that choice you made, to show kindness to a stranger." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, their children's laughter filling the air. The world beyond Haven's Cross still held prejudice and hatred, still fought old wars over old grievances. But here, in this community they had helped build, humans and orcs and others lived together in peace, proving that a different way was possible. Verna had found her voice because Thomas's gentleness had shown her it was safe to speak. And in speaking, in opening her heart, she had found not just love but belonging, not just a partner but a true home. Their story became legend in Haven's Cross, passed down as an example of what courage and compassion could create, how two people from different worlds could build something beautiful together. Years later, when her children were grown and starting families of their own, Verna would look back on that day in Thomas's field, when she had stood silent and afraid while he lowered his bow and offered her food instead of violence. That single act of kindness had changed the course of her life, had given her everything she held dear. She had pretended she could not speak to protect herself, but Thomas had drawn her voice out by showing her she did not need protection from him, only acceptance. And that voice, once released, had declared love and built a life and raised children who would never have to hide who they were or pretend to be less than they could be. That voice had helped create a community where others like her could find refuge and belonging. That voice, given courage by Thomas's gentle persistence, had become one of the most powerful forces in her life. Verna Thorne had learned that silence might be safety, but speaking, truly speaking from the heart, was freedom. And she had Thomas Vance to thank for teaching her that lesson, for loving her enough to wait until she was ready, for building a life where both their voices mattered equally, where their love could flourish without fear or shame. Together, they had created something extraordinary. Together, they had proved that love could bridge any divide, overcome any obstacle, transform fear into hope and strangers into family. And together, they would continue building that better world, one gentle word, one kind action, one brave choice at a time, for all the days they had left. Their story was complete, their ending happy, their love eternal. The orc girl who had pretended she could not speak had found her voice, and it had sung out joy and hope for the rest of her days.